Productions.
What's up, Joe? What's up, everybody? Today on Sports 360, I'm joined by Rob Duran of Rob Duran Sports. As usual, Rob joins me to talk about Major League Baseball. Today, we'll discuss MLB's struggle to return to the field of play, a struggle that is taking place at a time when our country is dealing with the anger, frustration, and outrage from millions of everyday citizens who are fed up with continued acts of inhumanity claiming the lives of Black Americans. It's a challenging time for us all, and we're ready to take it on right here on Sports 360. Joining me today on Sports 360 is Rob Duran of Rob Duran Sports, and he joins me today to talk about baseball and some other things that are going on in the world. But Rob, first of all, man, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Jeff. Doing good. Getting by with everything we got going on.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on. We haven't spoken in a few weeks now. Where the country's starting to come out of the coronavirus a little bit, and so that's good, obviously. And the talk of, getting back into sports is gaining some traction. It seems like we're going to be going there real soon, and baseball, and we're going to talk about that today, but also basketball and hockey as well. So it seems like things are moving in that direction, and all those things are good signs.
Yeah, definitely. It's good to get a little bit of what our normal life was to come back a little bit for us. So it's kind of like a breath of fresh air for us.
Yeah, it is, and I'm happy about it. At the prospects of it, and I know a lot of people are. There's so many sports fans that have been missing sports, and we've been watching some virtual sports, right? I think the last time we were on, we talked about some of the virtual stuff that's been going on, and
Hmm.
you know it's okay, and I think it's okay for a while, but I think for the mainstream fans, seeing the professionals back out there is what people are longing for right now.
Yeah, definitely agree. I actually saw towards the end of the Yankees' last championship in '09, and it felt great to watch and see them win the World Series. But it would be great to see them win it this year. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would. And I don't know, there was a player, Rob, and I forget who it was, who said that if whoever wins the World Series this year, it would even be more meaningful. I forget which player it was.
Yeah.
It was a prominent player who, because some people say it would be cheapened, right? Because you wouldn't have a full season. And his view was the opposite. He was saying no, he thinks that it would be even more meaningful. And I think perhaps because of all the things that players and teams would have to overcome in terms of
Yeah.
just getting back on the field and all the other things, right? To get back out there and to play under some unusual situations and come out on top. Maybe that's what he meant.
Yeah, I definitely agree with him. It's you have to get hot right off the start, depending on how many games they end up agreeing to play. You kind of have to come out the gate pretty hot to ride a good streak and right into the playoffs, whatever format they're going to have. So I think it is going to be a bit of a challenge. You're not going to be able to have these prolonged slumps and stuff like that going on, and still expect to succeed long term when there's such a short season.
Yeah, it puts a premium on, as you said, getting off to that good start. So
Yeah, every
we'll see
game is
how
going
it,
to matter.
yeah, no doubt about it. But But having said that, with baseball looking like it's going to return, and we want to talk about that, and with the pandemic seeming to at least easing up somewhat so that we can have some meaningful discussions about returning to play. We're also finding ourselves, though, right now, Rob, as we're talking here on June 1st, in the midst of some unrest throughout, several cities, at least in several cities in the country, over, the death of George Floyd, and police brutality and some other events, Ahmaud Arbery, and there's a lot of frustration among a lot of people right now that you know it puts sports in a different context, and what have you. But there's a lot going on, and so before talking about sports and the return of baseball, just wanted to spend a little time and get your thoughts a little bit about what's going on right now, as we see the unrest and just the heartache, the pain, the frustration, the anger that a lot of people are feeling right now.
Yeah, and you and I spoke a little bit before we went on air. There is a lot of frustration built up, and just seeing the images and the videos of everything that happened, the interaction between the police officer and George Floyd, and ultimately he he was murdered. He was killed by the actions of the police officer, and we wonder why this situation hurts a little more, or why it feels worse than the other situations. And it's not that so much that this was more important. It's just I feel that a lot of us just we've had enough. We've had enough of the killings. We've had enough of these young men and women being mistreated, not just because it's not always just a race thing for me. I think it's also just the human factor of it. Just seeing people mistreat people the way they're hurting them intentionally. And it's not okay. It's not okay to put your hands on someone that way, to put your knee on someone's neck that way. It's just not okay. And, the feeling, my parents are Dominican. I'm Dominican, but I was born in New York. So I get that sense. These are my brothers and sisters being affected by this stuff. And, I have a 2-year-old son who one day is going to be older. And, I've had conversations with my wife, with all this stuff going on. And we've kind of looked at each other and said, we may have to have this talk with him because, he's not dark skinned, but he's Dominican. He's Dominican. He has some Puerto Rican in him. My wife is half Puerto Rican, half Dominican. So he's not going to get all the same, chances, or be, get the benefit of the doubt in a lot of cases. So he is going to be a young man one day. He's going to be a grown man one day, and somebody's going to look at him the wrong way because he's a Dominican or whatever the case may be. And it's tough to know that you have to have that conversation with your kids. And it's getting younger and younger, the ages that people are having to have these conversations with their kids. And it's just unsettling. And I think that's what we're seeing a lot of, just people having the fear that their children growing up are going to suffer the same fate. And now they have to have these conversations very early, or show them these graphic videos and images very early so that they can get an understanding of what the real world is like out there. And that's sad. It makes me angry, chokes me up a little bit to talk about it, puts a knot in my throat to just have to have this conversation. But unfortunately, that's kind of where we are in society today, where this is still happening. And I think that's what we're seeing. Just, it's not this happened, it's this happened again. And that's the anger part, and that's the this is enough part that I think a lot of people, including myself, are feeling.
Yeah, you said it there. You said a lot there, and I do believe that a lot of what we're seeing in terms of the unrest is people expressing that enough is enough.
Yep.
I'm I'm an African American man. I was born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens. So, and, you know, right in the hood, you know what I mean? This is where I come from. And,
Yeah,
even, I'm a little bit older, in the sense of, I'm born in the early 60s, and even at that time as a teenager and as a young man in my 20s, we had issues with cops and things of that sort. Nothing that is what we're seeing now. At least I didn't have that personally, but as a black man and as a black person, how can you not relate to that and see what's going on and have all kinds of the frustration, the anger at the brutality. But this is, in the end, for me, this is about humanity, man. How
yeah,
do you treat another human being? Okay. And I think that's what you have black people and others, right? Because you're seeing a lot of people protesting here, and they're not all
yeah,
black people, right? They're not all people of color, and they're not all Americans. You're seeing, protests in other countries, based on what's going on here. There's protests right now going on in other countries because I believe that for many people of all colors, who are fair minded and right minded, they look at this and they say, enough is enough.
yeah,
And and for black people in particular, I speak for myself, but also I think I speak for many. There's a whole range of emotions, of anger, of frustration, of heartache, of pain. There's a profound sense of loss, even though I don't know and didn't know, you know, um, George Floyd personally. It doesn't matter because in some ways I did know him. You know what I mean? Because in some ways he's me and I'm him,
yeah,
and I think that's the thing that we feel, right? That because it was nothing about him that deserve that kind of treatment. So it could have been him, could have been me, could have been you, could have been any other person of color. And I think that's what's resonating with people right now. And you look at that, and we're talking about, and we're going to jump in and talk about baseball, but there have been some baseball players who, I'm talking about white
yeah,
players, not African Americans, who are coming out and saying, this is gone too far and enough is enough. Why is that? Because this is not simply a black issue. This is a human rights issue. You talked about it earlier with the knee on the neck. What human being, what human being deserves to have a knee placed on his or her neck for 8 minutes or for any amount of time?
yeah,
Who, as a human being, how can you look at that and not be offended, angry, hurt, outraged, and all the rest of it? And I think that's what people are feeling. And, right now there's a lot of stuff going out there on the streets, and, um, some protests, some peaceful protests, and then you have others who are, the protests are more violent. And it's, I think, on the latter part of it, a lot of it is the emotion and the heartache and the frustration and anger just boiling over.
yeah. And kudos to the white athletes and all the other white people who are standing up and expressing their voice and their thoughts about this, because I think for a long time it's been just black people speaking up and being ignored. But I think it is going to take some type of unison, or maybe white people standing in the front lines to say, this is not okay. We can't keep doing this, or this can't keep happening, for it to resonate. And I think that's what we're seeing now, hopefully. That these people are standing up with their black brothers and sisters. It's not just, you know, there's not a divide. There needs to be unison, some unity for everyone to see, you know, this is enough.
Right. And quite frankly, that really is the history in this country. When you really look at the civil rights movement, it
Yeah.
was, right, a coming together of people from various races and ethnic backgrounds and religions coming together. Why? Because in the end, this was about humanity and
Yes.
how we treat our fellow human beings. And that's not something that is unique to any particular race. We all should care about that. And again, I come back to the right minded, fair minded people.
Mhm.
Most, if not all, do care about that. Now, do we have some people on the fringes? Of course, always will, right? The hate groups and everything else, and others. But, I believe that, that's the part of the history of the civil rights movement is that coming together that you just talked about. And yeah, we are seeing that. And here's the beautiful thing, though. We're seeing it among our athletes where, many times athletes are told what shut up and dribble, right? Nah, ain't
Yep.
no shut up and dribble, no shut up and swing the bat, no shut up and, shoot the hockey puck or whatever. No, because they're citizens of this society and they're speaking out, and good for them because we're going to need every voice, to come and effectuate change.
Yep.
So, but yeah, it makes for a tough time. But against that backdrop, we you know we have these sports, including baseball, attempting to return to the field. And baseball, when you compare it to basketball and hockey, seems to be traveling a little bit of a more rocky road than those other two sports as they try to come back. Both sides, MLB and MLBPA, have made proposals. Right now, as we're talking, they seem to be far apart. MLB 82 game season. Uh, MLBPA has proposed a 114 game season. MLB wants to have a second cut of player salaries that are already prorated, and MLBPA wants to maintain prorated salaries, but there's other moving parts in each of the proposals. But um, just overall, Rob, what's your thought, man? Do you think that that the sides will be able to come to some resolution and we can see baseball in 2020?
I think eventually they will come to some type of agreement. There has to be some middle ground that the sport comes to, because you can't be, like you were mentioning earlier, you can't be the only sport that doesn't make moves to come back. Especially if things are starting to open up with the pandemic and all that stuff. So you can't fall behind with baseball. And I think we've had this conversation before where baseball kind of lags behind a little bit with the other sports, especially with NBA and NFL. So this is the situation where baseball can't do that. They have to find some type of middle ground. I think they will at some point come to some type of agreement with the salaries, which is the big issue right now. Obviously, they have to figure out the health protocols and all that stuff. We understand that, and that maybe that's the most complicated part because it's the biggest unknown in everything. Um, but I think what everyone's hearing and seeing a lot of is the salary talk, and I find it hard for me to kind of side with the owner side a little bit because of the amount of resources that teams have and generate throughout the years and things of that nature. So when I saw that the players and the owners agreed to this, I think it was in March, they agreed to the prorated salaries. In my mind, I thought, well, I think that'll be the biggest hurdle they overcome, aside from the health stuff. And when the talk started happening of owners wanted another cut, depending on whatever is going on behind the scenes and stuff like that, that's when I started to see the trouble going on. And I'm of the mindset, I side with the players a little bit here. I'm of the mindset that if the players agree to the prorated salaries, which is already a reduced cut, regardless, depending on how many games they play, whether it's half their salary or more than half, depending on the number of games. But I think that I thought that was a fair deal. I thought that was a good compromise on both sides where let's just do the prorated salaries, let's get paid for what we play. and move on from there. Let's have that be our starting point. And it's unfortunate at this moment that that seems to be the biggest hurdle. The hurdle that we thought was already crossed and done with has now resurfaced, and it's causing a big roadblock in this agreement to, put the dates out there for the fans to know this is when baseball is finally coming back.
Yeah, and for some who say, well, why is it that the NBA and the NHL seem to be moving forward on a smoother course than baseball? I think, in fairness to baseball, they have some more complicated issues to work out, as you just
Yeah,
alluded to, with the salaries, because in the NHL and in the NBA, their seasons were just about done, right?
yeah,
So the players had received most of their agreed to salaries for the current season. But in baseball, players have not yet received a paycheck for the regular season, right? Because of when the shutdown occurred in spring training. So, in addition to the health protocols, and in addition to figuring out how many games you're going to play and where you're going to play them, and how are you going to resume training camp, in spring training for baseball, in addition to those issues, which all the sports have, baseball has another issue, and that is the salaries, as you just mentioned. So
yeah,
it adds another layer of complexity to their negotiations. And obviously, as you said, even with prorated salaries, under the commissioner's office proposal of 82 games, that's roughly 50%, right? A little bit more than 50% of a 162 game regular season. So
yeah,
players are already taking a hit, right? They did get some salary advance money as part of that March agreement, but they have to pay that back because it was a salary advance. So, in a situation where players are getting, let's just say, if there's a 82 game season, they get 50% of their salary, and they have to then pay back the salary advance. For baseball to come back and say, we want an additional cut, you can understand why players are not really hearing that too well,
yeah,
um, and especially when you're asking them to come back in a potentially dangerous environment, right? Because I don't think, some of the health experts will probably say we still don't have this coronavirus under control here in this country. So you're asking players to come back in a dangerous situation to their health and to the health of their families, and then you're asking for a salary cut on top of a salary cut, on top of a payback your salary advance. That's a tough ask when you put it all
yeah.
together.
Exactly. And a lot of people don't know a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. So it's not just the baseball players come back and they play. There's umpires, there's, different staff and crew, and a lot of stuff goes into just getting one game started. So it's not just the players that, oh, well, why can't they just agree? They're millionaires. Not a lot of players are millionaires either. So, there's a lot of moving factors that the public may not understand, which is the unfortunate part about a lot of this information being leaked to the public and to the media and things like that, that it just kind of makes the players seem greedy or whatever the case may be, or just saying, oh, well, maybe they don't want to come back. And it's not that. It's what you're saying. There's a lot of stuff that goes into just let's go play. It's not that simple. And I think people need to understand that as well, that the players aren't being selfish or greedy or anything like that. It's the health concerns. It's the already agreed upon pay cut. It's what you mentioned, having to pay back that advance. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it that a lot of the public doesn't know or doesn't get to see because they only read the information that's leaked.
Right. And, as we're talking here, it was just yesterday that the MLBPA made its proposal to baseball of, again, a 114 game season. But included in that proposal, though, Rob, was, an offer by the players to have some salary deferrals, right, to help
Yeah,
ease the financial burden on owners. So players who are making over $10 million, if the postseason was canceled, right, would because it could be canceled, right? We don't know. It could be another wave of the
exactly.
virus, right? And so if we don't have a postseason, players were saying, hey, we'll defer our salaries. Players making over $10 million would defer their salaries to help ease some of that financial burden on the club. So it's not as if the players are saying we want everything and they're not, totally inflexible, right?
Yes,
They've shown a willingness to make some moves to try to have a season, and in the end, it's going to take compromise, right? Where neither side walks away fully satisfied, but you have a deal. Um,
exactly. Yep.
so
And I think that's important to, each side is going to lose something. So I think that, they have to, like you said, they have to come to some type of compromise. The game can't just not happen and baseball miss out on the opportunity to come back and, attract their fans. There are a lot of people waiting for baseball to start, and they can't let this stuff get in the way. And, we need the game. And I think the players' proposal, the one that you mentioned, 114 games, I think that was more of a conversation started than the owner's initial proposal. So I'm hoping that this kind of sparks the conversation and gets things moving in a positive direction moving forward.
that's my sense that it will. I think and let's not forget before MLB made its initial proposal, and they've only made one so far, but they floated this idea of the 50-50 split, remember?
Yes.
And, Tony Clark, the executive director of the PA, immediately shot that down and said that's the equivalent of a salary cap. No way, no how are we going to agree to that. But that was never a proposal that was officially made by MLB. It was sort of a trial balloon that they,
Yeah.
released in the media. And again, the players were not having any of it. So MLB made their initial proposal of 82 games plus some additional cuts. And Rob, some of those cuts were really severe. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So they were okay, prorated salary, and then we're going to scale that back by, the players who are making the most money were going to pay the steepest price, right? And you know, players weren't too happy about that for the reasons that we talked about. And now they've come back with their own proposal. And maybe at this point now, we can have some real discussion.
Yeah. And those proposed cuts that you're mentioning, I did post on my Instagram about it was a snapshot of the Yankees' highest paid players and kind of what they'll get paid with the proposed cuts. And Garrett Cole would go from 36 million down to 8. So that's a huge, huge jump from just it was a massive second cut that the players were going to take.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting about that, Rob, is that the eight that Garrett Cole would end up receiving includes a playoff bonus that was going to
Yes.
be added to all players because players who are making in that 35, $36 million range, we're going to end up being scaled back to about 5.5, 5.6, 5.7 million. And then they'd get an extra 2 million or so as a playoff bonus. But imagine, you're making a salary or you agree to a salary of 35 million. And I know there are going to be some people say, I'll take 35 million any day,
Yeah.
and I get it, but let's put ourselves aside. We don't have $35 million a year talent, most of us,
Yeah.
okay? We just don't, okay? So we don't have to get into that discussion. We know players get paid well, but that's the market that they're in. And so Garrett Cole earned
Exactly.
that. He earned the right to get that kind of a salary because of his performance, his talent, and everything else. But imagine, you agree to 36 million and they want to scale back your salary to 6 million. And for someone to say, well, I can live on 6 million, that's not the point.
Exactly.
The point is he negotiated a fair salary in a marketplace for 36 million. look, everybody's taking the hit because of the virus, and so he would get about half of that as 18. But then you want to take the 18 and bring it down to 6, and then say, well, we'll give you a bonus so that we'll get you to 8. And he's supposed to say, sign me up.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned because a lot of people have been saying that, like I mentioned earlier, oh, but they're millionaires. So I'm glad you mentioned that part because, God, I've had so many conversations with people on social media about that same topic where it's like, well, we're not Garrett Cole throwing 100-mile-an-hour fastballs
Right.
on the inside corner to make 35 million a year. So
Right. And I think if we wanted to just, think about it in our own terms, if you negotiate a salary with your boss, you know, are you easily going to just take pay cuts because of, whatever your boss may want to say? You're gonna want to protect your salary. You say, hey, we agreed to this, right? And you want to
exactly.
protect it. And in a situation like this, where the business is being hurt and so forth, you say, okay, I may have to share some of the pain. But if you've already been asked to take half of what you agreed to, wouldn't you think that, hey, I'm doing my share, right? That's how players are. It's not like players are demanding 100% of their salaries, right? So,
Yeah, and that's what I mentioned earlier too. Like, we thought the biggest hurdle would be salary going into anything because, a lot of it is money talk. And the fact that they agreed to the prorated salaries basically right out the gate, in a sense, that was huge. So to come back and ask for, oh, well, you already agreed to half, but how about we'll take another half or whatever the amount may be. It was obviously going to cause a lot of conflict in that situation. So that's the
yeah,
big thing.
yeah. And Rob, one other issue that I think bears watching is in both proposals, from both sides, it dealt with the ability of players to opt out of playing. And I believe MLB's proposal was limited to those who were had some health concerns or had family members who may be vulnerable. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
the player may not want to put themselves in a situation where they can endanger their family member, right? Who would, be vulnerable to the virus. Whereas the MLBPA proposal is broader in saying there may be some players who, even if they're not in that situation, either themselves or a family member, simply say, you know what, it's not worth it to me, right?
Yeah.
And they may want to opt out. I think that's going to be interesting to see, one, how that gets resolved and who will actually have the ability to opt out. But then second, to see if there will be players who opt out and who those players are. You know what I mean? It will be really interesting because, if it's one of the star players on the team that, is looking to contend or whatever, and he's one of the leading, starting pitcher or the leading hitter or whatever, and he says, you know what, fellas, I'm not playing this year. I'm opting out. It'll be interesting to
Yeah.
see how that plays out.
Yeah, it'll be big because there are a lot of, like, I think Mike Trout is expecting a baby sometime in the summer. So stuff like that would be interesting to see if maybe he decides, and that's a huge name. Mike Trout, best player in baseball. If he decides, well, you know what, I'm not going to risk my kid's health, my family's health, so I'm going to sit this one out. I don't think he would, but you never know. And there's a lot of players out there that we don't know what they're dealing with on the personal side, and maybe they do choose to opt out. So it'll be interesting to see how those players are perceived and received in the clubhouse moving forward, how their teammates look at them, how other players around the league look at these players who do decide to go with the opt out, if that ends up being part of the agreement moving forward. So I think you bring up a good point there. Um, it'll be something to watch for.
Right, and how fans react as well.
Yeah.
But this is where, Rob, we have to take a step back and realize that, these players in all the sports are supremely talented athletes. Yes, no question about it. But at the end of the day, they are human beings. They are husbands. They are wives. They have, family. They have children. And they have some of the same basic health concerns that all other people have every day, and especially
Yes.
in this current situation. And that's what we have to realize, because many times we idolize our athletes because they're so talented, and sometimes we make them into superhumans, but they're not superhumans. They're just simply human beings like everybody else. And this is
Yeah.
where it comes to bear. And some of these athletes, as supremely talented as they are, may make those sort of fundamental decisions as a man or as a woman, as a husband, as a wife, and say, you know what, I'm not playing. And if that happens, um, I think that decision has to be respected.
I agree. It definitely has to, because at the end of the day, like you said, we're all human. And this is a very unique situation with this pandemic. And I think that these athletes shouldn't be judged based on the decisions they're making as a result of this. If it's any other season and it's just, labor negotiations and they decide, well, you know what, I'm not going to play, that's different, but where these players have no idea, we mentioned earlier about a possible second wave, that's, it could be worse than the first wave. So these players are putting their lives at risk, their families at risk, and I don't think that they should be judged harshly or unfairly for deciding to sit this one out and protecting their families, which is, at the end of the day, the most important thing in their lives.
Couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. And so, yeah, so there's a lot to keep our eyes on here, with on the major league side, and what happens, and whether the union and Major League Baseball can come to an agreement. We both believe that they will, and hopefully we will be proven right. But you mentioned something earlier when we were talking offline about the minor leagues, because they're kind of getting lost here. But um, we have teams saying that's it. At the end of May, that was the last of it. We're not paying the minor leaguers anymore in our organization. You have other teams that are committing to pay them until the end of August, which would be the end of their regular season in any event. And then you have some other teams that are somewhere in between. So, what are your thoughts about minor league players who, in some ways, are being forgotten about here, it seems?
Man, I feel really bad for a lot of the minor leaguers, because like you said, they kind of are getting forgotten, and they're feeling this a lot harder than the major leaguers because they're not major league players yet. So, they don't have the union behind them. They don't have the guarantee that they're going to have a job tomorrow or next year or anything like that because they're in the minor leagues. And, the whole reduction of salaries or cutting their salaries off or whatever the case may be, it's hard to see, and it's sad for me to see it because we're we're in a place that obviously a lot of people are suffering and all that stuff. And even just that aside, the minor leaguers are, like you said, they're forgotten, and the owners aren't willing to pay. There's been a massive amount of cuts for minor league players, and the fact that there's been, I think David Price was one player who decided to kind of use his own money to pay for the minor leaguers in order to help them just make an everyday living. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way, not because David Price did that. I appreciate that he did that as someone who does feel for the minor leaguers, but it's not, I don't think it should be on the players to pay the minor leaguers, to pay their own peers. It is great to see, but I don't think that's something that should be happening. And it hurts the minor leaguers, not just because they're going to lose out on money, but they're also losing developmental time. And I think it hurts more, not so much maybe the higher end of the minor leaguers, AAA, some AA players, but the low A, and rookie ball and all that stuff, because those players are already on the fence on a year-to-year basis, and the fact that they're losing this year to, get some live pitching or play with their practice with coaches and their own teammates and people of that, that stature, they're losing that. So where their career was already on the fence, now they're losing an entire year, and so many of them probably have already been cut, but so many more will probably get cut and not have the opportunity to have their dreams come true and become major league players as a result of everything that's happening. And it, it just sucks to see, honestly.
Yeah, it's tough, and the points that you made on the financial side, right? Obviously, there's a hit because even up until for some clubs, that stopped paying the players in at the end of May, those
Yeah.
players were getting $400 a week. So for many of them, they weren't getting what they would normally get. Um, and you have some clubs that have stopped those payments, and so there's that financial burden there for a lot of minor league players. But the other point you made is really important, and that's on the developmental side. To lose a year of development and development opportunities, you can't get it back. You're a year older on the calendar now. Um,
Mhm.
there'll be another wave of players, not as many because it's not as, the draft is only 5 rounds this year, but there'll be
Yeah.
another wave of players coming in. But you lost out on that, as you said, the pitching, the playing, the coaching, the instruction, and you can't get that back. And so that's, again, and it's no one's fault, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's part of this pandemic that we're in, but it yet shows another layer of the effect of this virus on baseball in particular, sports also, and obviously we all are experiencing it in our everyday lives as well. And it just shows the disruption and the devastation and the harm on so many levels caused by this virus.
Yeah, and it's tough to see because you kind of want just, all around fairness for everyone, but with obviously with the situation, it's hard to see that and to give that because of the situation we're in. But yeah, it's tough. Like I said before, it's a very unique situation we're in, and we can just all we can do at this point is just kind of hope for the very best of what we have.
Yeah. And Rob, we've been talking about this off and on over the past few weeks as we've been in a lockdown. And we talked about, if we ever did get to a point where where it seemed as if sports was going to return, that would be a good sign because it would mean that the virus was under some sort of control, or in a better situation of containment, and hospital resources are freed up and so forth. And so it does seem that we're moving that way, but it's still with a lot of uncertainty. And we still don't know whether sports are going to return, but it looks um, a lot better than it did weeks ago. And even in baseball, even though they have a lot of work to do, hopefully they'll get it done. And if they do, Rob, obviously, as this goes on, we'll come back and we'll continue to talk about it. And hopefully, in a few weeks, maybe we'll be talking about spring training and, the delayed start of the 2020 season.
Yeah, that's the hope. That's what I'm hoping for. That you know, one of us text each other later this week saying we got it. We're coming back.
Right, right, right. Right, and we can come back and talk about the games on the field. I think we all could use that. We all could use, um, just seeing the games back. But obviously, there's a lot of work to be done. And at the same time, we still have the virus that we have to be, mindful of. And
Yeah,
as we were talking about at the top of the show, we also have some things going on in our communities that are of grave concern to us as well. So there is a lot going on at this particular time, even though many of us are, in some form of lockdown and not as active as we are in our normal lives, there's yet still a lot going on right now. And so we'll see where it goes. So, we'll stay in touch. Again, hopefully we'll be back sooner than later to, talk a little bit more about baseball. Hopefully we'll be talking about a deal being done and spring training being scheduled and all the rest of it. But we just have to keep our eyes on it. And either which way it goes, let's be sure to connect real soon and talk about it and hopefully bring some light to some of the topics that are going on at that particular time.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it, man.
I appreciate you, man. Always appreciate you coming on and being part of the show. So I'll talk with you soon. All right, Rob?
All right. Take care.
You too.